One day, when I was in Pakistan, I went to watch a football match with my grandfather. We saw my uncle on his motorbike. My grandfather said, "Stop your uncle and ask him to come and watch the football with us." I'm reading one of the stories from Racing to English. When I was teaching, I collected about 50 of these stories. They're all written by real children. This is written by somebody called Khalid. And I've chosen the best 25 to put on Racing to English. So just let me finish reading to you. I stood in the middle of the road and I put out my arms, but my uncle didn't stop. The motorbike crashed into me. A man took me to hospital in a lorry. The doctor put 8 stitches in my head. My head was very painful and I was disappointed that I didn't see the football match. I just love these stories. I mean, they're so small and sweet but interesting. But can you imagine what it's like when you've been in the country only, say, 6 months and your story is being used as a teaching aid? The children were just thrilled when I printed them out for them and gave them to them. So, suggestion number 1, collect stories and use them in your teaching. But as well as being motivating for the children who actually wrote them, these stories have got some other advantages as well. I mean, the first thing is they reflect the children's real background in a very tiny little way. But it's so difficult to find stories and other books that reflect the children's background, so these really help. And of course, they come with simplified language, because the children are only using the words that are within their vocabulary. Oh, of course, I did have to correct all the stories. They came out with many, many mistakes. And there's one other thing that stories do. They give a context for the language which helps us to understand it. Now, that's particularly important for abstract words. But for things, like noses and shoes that you can get pictures for, or real objects, that's no problem. But if it's like disappointment, you can't get a picture of that. So you really need a story to show you what it means. And these stories do provide that. Well, as you know, I think active learning and interaction with other learners are really important. So come and have a look at the ways in which I try to make these stories both active learning and interactive. Well, the first thing I've done is make a sequencing activity. I've just printed the story out of sequence in little boxes. The children just cut it up into strips and work in 2s or 3s to sort it out. As you can see, this is a different story. It's Sorry About Hot Water. And poor old Wahid, who wrote it, was walking past the kitchens at school one day when they were making the school dinners, and one of the chefs threw some hot water out the window, all over his face. Now, it wasn't boiling, it didn't disfigure him, but he was a little bit unhappy about it, of course, and his uncle went and made them apologise. So that's your little story. Again, lovely, lovely, sweet stories. But getting children to interact with the stories and interact with each other is really important. Now here's Khalid's football story again. Now at the bottom, as you can see, I've got some words. And there's an interesting exercise here. It says, can you translate them into your first language? Getting children to translate from English into their first language is a brilliant way of checking that they understand and also making them remember the word. I've also got simply, can you read it if you don't speak a second language? On the next page, I've got some very simple questions. So these first ones are just yes or no. Did Khalid watch a football match with his uncle? Well, no, he didn't. But one of the little things I've got here is ask your friend some questions. So really important to get kids working together. Put them in pairs. One person asks all the questions, then the other person asks all the questions, or they alternate it. Then I've got some questions to which the answer is either yes, I have, or no, I haven't. Now that's quite an advanced tense, but I teach it very early because it can be very valuable. So it has questions like, have you ever stood in the middle of the road? Or have you ever said stop? Well, those questions might lead to somebody else's story if they say, yes, I have. So that's why I do that so early on. And finally, I've got some WH questions like who went to watch a football match, who, where, when. And again, getting children to ask each other the questions before they do the writing is very important. They'll really understand it much better if you do that. And the final page. Now, worksheet 2 has got all sorts of different activities at all sorts of different levels. So hopefully there will be one or two at least that will be absolutely right for the children you're teaching. Now, either you might want your students to choose for themselves what they're going to do, or you could point out to them the ones that you want them to complete. But whichever they are, hopefully you'll find some that are at the right educational level for them. Let's look first at the top section of this worksheet. The main focus of this section is to get children to write a story, because all of this work is all about reading and writing stories. But of course some students, some children are not ready to write a story yet, and so I put the bit about drawing a picture of a motorbike. Of course for younger children you've got all your hand-eye coordination stuff to be learning, but actually it's very interesting that we don't learn the parts of a motorbike or anything until we've actually drawn it sometimes. We don't know how they all fit together. And so if somebody draws a motorbike, you might find you've got all sorts of vocabulary work that you can build onto that, you know, like mudguard and wheel and handlebar and so on. So you have a choice then of going straight into the story or drawing something that actually might inspire you to write a story. So not only do your vocabulary, but actually give you some inspiration. And finally, as you can see, if children are ready to write a story, then I'm challenging them to make their own word search, which again is fantastic for reinforcing spelling and so on. Oh, and finally, of course, it's vital that children use both their languages if they're really going to develop both of them at the same time. So some children will really thrive if you ask them to write in their first language. And of course, you say it, that maybe when they've written it in Arabic or whatever, they'll say, but you can't read this. Of course I can't. So can you write it in English for me? Yeah, there we are. So mainly looking at stories and writing stories for this section. Here in the middle section, as you can see, I've got a word search. Now, I used to be quite dismissive about word searches, but the more I think about them, the more valuable I think they are. I mean, the first thing to say is that they are game-like, they're fun, and so they attract people in. The second thing, of course, is you're concentrating on the spelling. And I've got the words there for you to find, so you're looking at the words, trying to find them, so the look of the words and the spelling of the words is very rapidly going into your brain with a bit of luck. And finally, of course, it's actually getting you to look at the words in the story over and over and over again. So you're not only thinking of the spelling, but you're also thinking of the meaning and how it fits into the story. So here's my word search. I really recommend them now. At the bottom of the page is my favourite exercise. You have to write 7 questions about the story, but the answer to each of the questions must be, I don't know. So for instance, in this story, it was where was the football match, or why didn't Callie's uncle stop the motorbike? And we don't know from the story. Okay, so you write those 7 questions, and then you have to write the whole story out, but add the answers to the questions you've written to the story. Of course, you have to make that bit up. It's all about extending writing and challenging the students to increase the number of words they write in a story and extend their thinking. So I really do recommend those stories to you and those activities that get children interacting. So try collecting your own stories. Oh, and send some to me. That would be fun. I could add some more to Racing to English.